Part 2. So let me go over a little bit of what happens during a stroke, the initial parts of a stroke, or could be even brain injury, any type of brain injury. So initially when a stroke occurs, there's damage to the brain. And there's cell death. There's a lot of chaotic events that happen within that area of the brain. There's ischemia, cells die, metabolism is altered, and there's a lot of metabolic byproducts and cell products building up in that area. And that's called diaskesis. So it's the initial reaction of the stroke. And that area within the brain is basically in chaos. and some people refer to it as almost like brain shock. And so that happens over the initial few days, and gradually as the circulation in the adjacent area is reestablished, metabolic byproducts and the cellular products are taken away, metabolized, what have you. And then recovery starts to occur. And within this process, there is brain reorganization, neuronal reorganization, and plasticity. Now, we classically know that within the central nervous systems, neurons can't regenerate. And so with that in mind, new neuronal cells aren't being reestablished. But what happens is, therefore, those cells, those neurons that have survived, need to take over the duties, in a sense, or the tasks of the neurons that have been impacted. And so what happens is there is a reorganization of the brain in reestablishing pathways back to connecting with the body. And so in that way, it reestablishes connections in a sensory manner as well as motoric manner. So one of the ways of looking at this in sort of an analogy is that these are telephone connection lines, let's say, communication lines within the world. So you have the United States and Asia. There's connections to Asia and Europe and South America, India, wherever else. And so in a normal process, these connections are going well. You can call up Asia, or you can call up your relatives in India or Europe, what have you, no problem. But if there is an insult to one of the communication lines and the direct connections are lost, then initially there is all chaos, right? You can't connect to your relatives, you get frustrated, you call the company and say, what's going on? And so what happens, though, is there needs to be a reestablishment of the communication lines through the existing lines that are around. And it may not be a direct connection, but it may be a step-by-step process in order to reestablish that connection between the two parties. So initially, as you can imagine, this initial connection is going to be very faulty, very haphazard. Lines are going to be dropped. It's going to be very frustrating. But the only way to improve upon that is to try and reconnect, is to try and keep working at it and try to reestablish those connections. And with use and with demand and with persistence, in a sense, the connection becomes reestablished. And as you keep using that, it becomes more fluid, it becomes more efficient, and then the line of communication between those two centers is reestablished. So that's pretty similar in terms, sort of in a simplistic manner, of how the neuronal connections get reestablished within the brain after a stroke. So what does this mean, reestablishing pathways and relearning function? So the basis of rehabilitation is relearning functional tasks. Okay, so what does that mean? So when we learn a task, it is an adaptive behavioral change occurring in response to an experience. in order to accomplish an objective. So when we are faced, let's say, with having to write our name on the signature line, we are presented with a paper that says signature. And so the response is to be able to pick up a pen and write and sign your name in a script or whatever way that you sign your signature. And initially, when you first learn how to do that, you're presented with the paper. You ask questions as to what you need to do. You try to sign your name, and it goes a little off at first. And then as you keep signing, it becomes a more established and almost second nature process. So in a sense, that becomes a behavioral change in response to that experience and to accomplish the objective of being able to sign your name. So after a while, when a paper is presented to you with a signature line, you know exactly what to do. Your behavior has changed so that you are able to accomplish signing the line. All right. And so the brain, that's a very simplistic task, of course, but the brain reorganizes in response to interactions with the environment. So this is what we call experience. So if we're faced with a certain experience, a certain task, a certain activity of daily living after a stroke, the brain must reorganize itself in response to this new encounter. And when the patient is faced with the need to, let's say, brush his teeth or his or her teeth, and they have an impaired arm, that person needs to reestablish that task and relearn that task. And so the brain, again, reorganizes in response to those interactions that are presented to it. And with that, there's the stimulus for plasticity, that is the functional demand or need of the patient. So a patient needs to brush their teeth every day, so that need is presented to that person every day. And so that is a stimulus for the person to, in a sense, try to become as skilled as possible in reestablishing the ability to brush his or her teeth. That is the stimulus for plasticity and reestablishing the neural connections. In other words, if a patient does not feel the need to do that task, eventually that ability to do that task will be lost.